That is exciting.
And probably in less time. Win-win. But all right. We should be pretty good now. Let's start the show. Welcome back, Bears fans, to another episode of the Chicago Audible, and welcome to our first off-season episode of 2021. Earlier today, we heard from Bears chairman George McCaskey, president Ted Phillips, general manager Ryan Pace, and head coach Matt Nagy, who all shared a whole lot of, how do I frame this kindly, poppycock? I'm your host, Will DeWitt. Joined with me is my co-host Nicholas Moriano. We are here to share our takeaways from today's press conference and the news that really, the only major change so far from an organizational standpoint is the, quote, retirement of defensive coordinator Chuck Pagano. Nick, we're only a few days removed from the Bears' first-round exit in the playoffs, and even though everyone, Ted, George, Pace, and Nagy, all mentioned that they're frustrated with the results of the team, but really it didn't feel like the front office was on edge, as reported yesterday. It didn't feel like they had much of a clue at what changes really need to be made to right the ship other than, weirdly enough, stay the course with the current leadership. And before we dive into any specifics, which there aren't many that came out today, I'm just curious, Nick, what is your sense of the tone that we heard from the Bears brass?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, Will, because there wasn't any, it didn't seem like there was a sense of urgency. And you saw many times throughout this press conference, whether it was Nagy, Pace, Phillips, or McCaskey, like we're 3 days removed from the season. We're now going to start getting to the evaluation of things. So it's like, I get that. Maybe you want to take a break or whatever, but there wasn't that sense of urgency. And with everything that's wrong with this Bears organization, I would have felt like if I was in charge, like that, they would have already had their homework, already would have had, steps in place for what they want to do, like right now, not give the answers that they gave, which again, like you mentioned, Will, were a lot of nothing. So it just seemed like there was a lack of urgency, and the tone was that everyone felt good about where they're at in terms of their job security, because they're all back. So that's the reality of the situation.
Okay, so and on top of lack of urgency, do you also come away with the same understanding that there wasn't any accountability with anybody in this organization?
Absolutely, Will. And I'll scroll through Twitter to find the tweet from Lawrence Holmes, but when you don't have accountability for there is no accountability when they're not giving it to anyone, right? So exactly, like no one's to blame for this. It's another 8-8 season, and there wasn't any finger pointing as to whose fault it was. And, they're not going to throw anybody under the bus, but yeah, it's a very good point. Nobody is being held accountable for another disappointing season, another 8-8 season that obviously fell short of what Bears fans are expecting, and of course the organization.
Right. It really felt like everybody was kind of okay with the status quo. Like, we like everybody in the building. Everyone works well together, and we can figure it out as long as we stick together. But at the same time, McCaskey and Ted Phillips really did kind of set the stage for a do-or-die season for both Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy, just by, it almost felt like putting the blame at their feet, but also just like, I guess, deferring to them. Like, well, they're our football guys, and we believe they work well together, and they have a strong relationship, and it's up to them to find the success this season, and we're hoping that they can do it. That's pretty much, if you want to know the press conference in a nutshell, I think that's it.
Yeah, well, the collaboration, right? Oh my goodness, I heard that word so often. Here's a tweet from Lawrence Holmes. He said, "Collaboration is slick corporate speak. If everybody's responsible, then nobody is responsible or accountable." And that's exactly true. And that's exactly what played out in this, almost 2 hour long press conference between all four of the people that spoke today. But yeah, exactly. Collaboration. They feel good about who's in charge. And again, we'll have to see how 2021 actually plays out.
All right, so here's what we're going to do today in this episode. That was just kind of just us getting some things off of our chest, getting the frame right. We'll talk about George and Ted's press conference. We'll also tie in what Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace had to say today. And then we'll also talk about Chuck Pagano's retirement, as they're putting it, and looking at some potential replacements out there as well right now as we kind of kickstart our 2021 offseason. But Nick, are you ready to try to dive into this minutia of information, I guess, was put forward here today?
We could try, Will. Let's try to dissect this and see what we can get out of it.
Okay, so I want to start with George and Ted, and really with them talking about the culture and how they believe that Nagy and Pace are strong leaders, and sticking with them is what could be the fastest track to keep the Bears, or at least get them back to winning ways. I actually do have a clip that we could listen to, and then let's talk about it.
Both Ryan and Matt were instrumental in holding the team together. We're not happy, and we're far from satisfied. Making the playoffs is a step in the right direction, but it's not enough. We need to win in the playoffs, and we need to compete for and win a championship. We know we need to get better. We believe that Ryan and Matt are excellent leaders. They have each had successes and failures, but the path to winning is rarely linear, and we feel that the strong ability of Ryan and Matt to work together to build a shared vision of success is the fastest way towards building a consistently winning organization. And we trust Ryan and Matt to be solution-oriented and to continue to work through all those challenges together and get us on the right path towards being a winning Chicago Bears team.
Okay, Nick, so to start this off, this is now the start of year 3 for these two working together. How should we expect it to be any different than what we've seen so far? Like they're trying to sell us. And I understand, like he mentioned, that was Ted Phillips. Success is not always linear. You see that in all the books, all the motivational speakers. You're going to have, valleys, and you're going to have some low points as well. And I'm just curious, for your point, Nick, how can you expect Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy, if we stick with this status quo of them working together and collaborating, is the word, to really do anything that we already haven't seen?
Well, Will, it's because of the way they collaborate. That's what I have quoted here. That's why we should have this confidence that Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace can turn this thing around, because of the way they collaborate. But to be completely honest, I don't know, Will. Like throughout this press conference today, they pointed to that 6-game losing streak and how they handled it as a positive. They've turned it into a positive light. So they're like, if they can handle this adversity, and they can also handle winning in 2018. You see how they handled winning in 2018? They went to an 8-8 season right after. You see what happens when they had that 6-game losing streak. They won 3 and then still lost the last 2 most important games. So where is the confidence that even if these two can collaborate really well, it hasn't resulted in anything on the field? 2 playoff appearances, I get that, but no playoff wins. So there shouldn't be confidence, but the whole message that they were trying to say is that because these two can collaborate so well, you should have confidence in them to get out of this rut, but there hasn't been any evidence that they can actually do that.
Right, and we haven't seen it. And another thing that I'm trying to really grasp at all afternoon, I've just been trying to work it through in my head, and they kept hitting it over and over again. It's Ryan Pace's and Matt Nagy's ability to learn from their mistakes after self-reflection. And when it comes to Matt Nagy and his big ego and his unwillingness to really get out of the play calls as much as we all believe he should, I just have a hard time seeing any evidence of either of these guys learning from any mistake. And we'll talk about their press conference later. And Ryan Pace was directly asked, what did you learn from the Trubisky-Mahomes botch? And he walked right over that question without even acknowledging it, which, again, how do you look at these two and say, you know what, those are guys that learn from their mistakes? I just don't understand how you come to that conclusion.
No, neither do I, Will. And just to quickly hit on adaptability was one of the positives that, George McCaskey and Ted Phillips mentioned. They came in and adapt at halftime, Will. We saw the third quarter, every single they're asking about talking about the adaptability. And I immediately thought, well, what about every time that team went into, halftime and came out the third quarter? They can't even adapt there. Bullcrap answer about the adaptability, because that's the first thing I thought about. What about the performance on the field? They showed no way of adapting right then and there.
They did not. And when they were asked about what leads this team to believe that after 2 seasons of what they're going to call adversity, which maybe is a very polite way to kind of frame the last 2 seasons, and just sticking together through it, and that the team is positioned to overcome it and get to a point where, this adversity does not need to be dealt with any further, and we can actually celebrate some successes. This is what George McCaskey had to say about getting to a point without any adversity.
Well, that's a good question. We need to see improvement. We're not satisfied with where we are now, but we think that both Ryan and Matt are the people best able to lead us to success.
Okay, so again, putting it to Matt and Ryan, and it's on them, but they need to see success. We're not seeing success, and the only way to get success is running this marathon that we're continuing to be dehydrated through. And I just feel like it's almost the definition of insanity. Like, we need to see better results, but in order to get these better results, we need to stick with what we're doing. And it's just, that was the whole theme, back and forth for another 45 minutes with these two. And I don't know, it's hard to even respond to that clip with anything of substance, because it itself was just crap.
Nothing too. And like how they came to the conclusion of bringing them Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace back was, and they kept mentioning this, the body of work, the body of work that Matt Nagy has put out there, the body of work that Ryan Pace has put out there. Okay, what body of work are George McCaskey and Ted Phillips really looking at and saying, wow, I need to have Ryan Pace back. I need to have Matt Nagy back because of the body of work. Are you talking about the body of work with Matt Nagy's offense that's been bottom of the league the last 2 seasons, or Ryan Pace just missing on obviously Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, bringing in Robert Quinn, bringing in Nick Foles, Mike Glennon, that body of work you feel comfortable with? So that is what I don't get, Will, that George McCaskey is referring to those 2 guys, Ryan Pace, Matt Nagy, to solve this problem, and because of their body of work, well, their body of work shouldn't lead anybody to have any confidence that they can get this team out of this mediocrity, this 8-8 season that they just put back these past 2 seasons.
And they kept talking on and on about how proud of the culture that is inside House Hall right now. And they just kept going on and saying, outside of wins and losses, what makes a strong culture is the people, and having the people who can check through egos, learn from mistakes, and build off of them. You mentioned it, the body of work from Pace and Nagy, even though they're not enough, but they believe that the foundation is in place for the results to come sooner rather than later, and they expect to see them this year. And again, reiterating the fact that the continuity is best for the Bears at this time, even if that's not a popular decision. And how he kept framing that, like, I don't think people like this. I couldn't tell if he meant within the organization, out of the organization, or both. Did you have a sense? Because it really felt like, I think there's some people internally that would like to have a change, but they just didn't get it.
Well, I didn't see it that way, but I now that you mention it, I think that, yeah, it is a valid point. But what, like the quote that he has, when you sit back and look at what makes a successful organization besides wins and losses, it's the people that you have. I just immediately said, no, it's the wins that makes a successful organization. It's not like, yes, you can have a great culture with the right people, and that is very important, and that has helped the Bears stay together. But when you think about success, you think about success in the NFL, you think about how many times have they been to the playoffs and won games and made deep playoff runs and have been a legitimate contender to win Super Bowls. That's how I deem success. I don't think about like, hey, look at all the good guys we got in the locker room. Let's go 8-8 and, go 8-8 again. That's not how I view success. I know these passionate Bears fans feel the exact same way. So when he said that, I'm like thinking in my head, and I wrote on my little my Samsung Galaxy tablet, no, it's about wins, you fool. It's about wins. So that just didn't make sense to me.
This isn't high school. This isn't middle school. There aren't any of those personal victories.
Awards,
right.
Yeah.
You're not here to, teach young men and instill good values in them. Everyone's there to win a Super Bowl, to win a title, to go to the playoffs, win playoff games, and all of those have been very hard to come by in Chicago. But to be, I would say, happy with the organization, despite having everything that you should be aspiring for, is still a very a confusing situation for me. And another confusing one is also that McCaskey and Ted Phillips do not have anyone above them in this organization with a football background. And I know that, Mark Potash, he was mentioned, he actually had a really good question about it. And this is where it all kind of, to me, got really interesting. Just give this a listen.
I think the criticism is that you are judging the coach and general manager, and I think people feel that the Bears need people more rooted in football to make that decision.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Yeah. That's a valid criticism. My performance is evaluated by ownership and the board, and that's how that process works.
So again, not even mentioning, maybe it would be wise to have a higher up football mind that can critique me and how I do my job. And right now I'm critiqued by the board and ownership, which is pretty much family for George McCaskey. So that's, again, I think you can start to dive in and see where things could be going astray here. But I think this is a really good point that Mark made, though. Like, they should have someone who's either like the president of football operations or just a stronger football background that need to hold these two more accountable, because I think what we're seeing right now, as we talked about on the top of the show, no accountability here for your president, for your chairman, and I think that's starting to trickle down. And if you're talking about a good culture, I don't think this is a great way to sustain it.
Absolutely. Well, that was a 15-word answer. My performance is evaluated by ownership and the board, and that's how that process works. So I just wrote that down. So this man is being evaluated, like you said, Will, by family and very small amount of people, in ultimately being the final say and making some very important decisions. But like you said, he doesn't have that football background. He referred to Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace are my guys with a football background, and then he didn't hear the question right and gave this response. So that scares me. That means that, let's say they did get fired. He would be the ultimate, say again and probably, be in the discussion to hire somebody else. But that's why he kept the status quo, because no one's going to really tell him no. And that's what kind of, I think, is keeping this team from really progressing. Because if George McCaskey is not going to really be surveyed or maybe just watched over by someone that has a football mind, then you're going to keep making the same stupid football decisions that don't obviously work out. But that was a very telling answer. And just seeing that no one really, relegates him, that's a concern.
It sure is. And I know they've also mentioned there's reasons for hope. And I know there are always going to be some positives if you look for them. They talk about a young foundation, better draft classes over the last 3 years. And then also, and this one is confusing to me how this is a positive, but you have a GM and a head coach that are learning. Ryan Pace is 6 years in this thing. And he also mentioned, do you think that's fair that he's in a spot where he's still learning? And I know their answer is yes. But I don't know, Nick. It's hard for me to explain why. I understand you always want to be learning. You don't want to be static. But it was framed as such they're still getting the hang of this thing. What?
That's exactly how I felt when they answered. 6 years isn't – I mean, look, it's a tough job. And, look, we're never going to know what that's like. But 6 years, you've had a go at this. And it seemed like he was still at the very beginning stages. And he's learned from those beginning stages, and that's where we're at today. So, yeah, I interpreted it the exact same way, that he's obviously still in this process, but still doesn't have the hang of it whatsoever. And that's why we're here at this point, wanting change, but still staying with the status quo.
Are you as disgusted as I guess am? I was going to say was, but it's not like the feeling has left me, that they kept looking at that 6-game losing streak as a weird positive. That was hit on from everyone who spoke with the media today about the team's ability to overcome that losing streak. Obviously, good teams and strong cultures, I believe, don't have one to begin with, but they kept looking at that as a positive. We were able to get out of it and win a few games and get into the playoffs. Again, if this is only a 6-seed playoff system, like it's been every single year prior, the Bears do not get in. We're probably having a whole different discussion here today, and I'm still confused why you're looking at that 6-game losing streak as a thing to point to as a silver lining.
Yeah, and they all pointed to the 6-game losing streak. Like, that's so Bears. So, like, that 6-game losing streak we had? Man, we liked what we saw from that 6-game losing streak. As soon as I heard that, maybe the fourth time, I like had to tweet about it because it just didn't make sense. Like, obviously, they liked how the locker room didn't, disband and things didn't happen there.
Which is fair because we thought it was going to happen.
Yeah.
We really thought that could happen, and it didn't. And I think that's a fair point. But to go ahead and continue.
But you don't have 6-game losing streaks. That's like the main points that like they kept saying like, well, other teams may have folded if they had this. Like you mentioned, well, other teams just don't have 6-game losing streaks. So this is not a factor. So it's just such a weird, I guess, way to look at it. Like, man, we really like the 6-game losing streak. Come on, man. Like that is so Bears. And that's where we're at right now. They look at the darkest point of the season and try to get the light, like, right? But come on, that's not how it should be viewed. You lost 6 games in a row and you squeaked into the playoffs because the Rams helped you out, and that's how it should be viewed. It shouldn't be a positive thing, but the Bears, of course, spun it that way.
Right. I have 2 big picture topics I think kind of encompass all 4 press conferences today that I want to discuss, and then we can dive into Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy just a little bit more. Those are going to be the contract status of Nagy and Pace, as well as the leadership's trust in Nagy and Pace to get the quarterback position right, and some of the comments that Pace and Nagy mentioned on this as well. But before I get to those, Nick, is there anything else when it came to Ted Phillips and George McCaskey that you wanted to mention that they talked about here today?
No, just looking through my notes here, we mentioned the body of work. There's no like censorship on George McCaskey, the positivity around the 6 games. I think those were the main points that I took away from what George and Ted had to say. But kind of going to now like the contracts that you were stating, Will, someone on Twitter, and this was kind of interesting because a lot of the Bears beat writers kind of were like, oh, well, that's interesting. If you go to the Bears website, and again, maybe this is not updated, maybe it's not accurate as of today. Here's what you'll read under Ryan Pace. And, of course, we'll still talk about the contract. So, Ryan Pace, the 2018 Sporting News NFL Executive of the Year, is in his 6th season as general manager of the Chicago Bears in 2020. He's the 6th general manager in franchise history after being hired on January 8, 2015. On January 1st, 2018, the Bears announced a 3-year contract extension for Pace, keeping him with the club through 2021. And people were like, wait, that's just on there? And I'm like, that can't be on there. So I went to go check, and obviously a lot of the questions were, what is your contract? But it was just so strange that obviously they didn't answer it, but why? Why does it have to be such a mystery? And
right.
I know someone brought up like players' contracts are visible and known. Why can't the general manager and the head coach of the football team be something known so fans can know about it? So maybe this can factor into why the decisions are being made when they are and why they're keeping status quo.
Yes, let's talk about that. But first, I want to hear, I think people, if they've missed the press conference, they should hear how these questions were attempted to be answered. But then we need to have that conversation because I'm right there with you. There's no reason why they should be as coy about them and secret and seclusive, because it should be general knowledge of how long these guys are under contract. And let's just get to these first and let's talk about this a little bit more. So let's talk about, or let's listen to Ted Phillips' response. And the question did come from Mark Potash as well.
The contracts really aren't part of this discussion. Ryan and Matt both know that when improvement's shown, they'll take care of themselves. So I'd like to leave that just as that with that comment.
But you can't say when they're signed through.
And in terms of
when do their current
it's not really pertinent to what we're talking about here today, in my opinion.
So that's Ted. And then later, Hub Arkich asked Ryan Pace to kind of give some of the details of his contract, framed it really nicely, like, hey, as reporters, we would like to have this information so we can report accurately. We can understand if it's the final year of your deal. If you're making some big swings, we can kind of put it into some perspective, help us out. And then this is what Ryan Pace had to say.
Ryan, with all due respect, we do know the terms of the players' contracts. I'm just asking when they expire. I don't care what you make or anything like that.
And to me, Hub, that's just that's just a non-factor in anything we're doing. I understand why you're asking it, but to me, it's just all about what's best for the team, and without getting into contract durations or any specifics.
So again, walking around it, we're not going to get any answers. Didn't expect them. Applause to the reporters, though, because they did ask some really tough questions instead of giving them softballs here today, which to me was another breath of fresh air. But Nick, why does it need to be so confusing and just not public information to know? Again, maybe Ryan Pace's contract does end after this year, at least according to the team website, but why not just double down on that and say that's the case? And why does it matter? I mean, we should know. Every other team puts this out there. I don't know if there's like extensions in place and they feel bad about them and they don't want to announce them, so they're embarrassed or what, but I can't think of one good reason why they wouldn't give us this information.
Yeah, no, it was such a confusing, I guess, responses when I heard, Ted Phillips and Ryan Pace kind of talk about that. But the thing I was kind of thinking about, like, it does sound like, according to Ted Phillips and how he framed it about the contract extensions, like this is a must-win year, and that both Matt Nagy, regardless of what happened, Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace are connected. Like if one's going, the other one is going. But like you can also look at it this way, like they kept talking about the quarterback position, and if there are contracts in extensions in place, you don't necessarily need to groom a guy that needs to play right now. You can groom him for a year or two, and that's why they feel comfortable about their job, and that's why they're not talking about extensions, because they know they're here for a little bit longer. That could be a scenario. But to answer your question, well, I really don't have a good answer why you just can't tell us. Like Hub Arkesh was asking, like, just we don't care how much you make, just when does it end? That's all we want to know, but it wasn't pertinent. Right, according to Ted Phillips, that wasn't.
We're looking at the team's future. We're looking at getting over this middle ground mediocrity that we're in. How long are you here for, man? I just need to know. That's not pertinent. Like I can be here 1 year, I can be here 10 years. It's all the same. I don't understand it one bit whatsoever. And I also know they were asking about the COVID year and the drop of revenue because you don't have fans in the stands and things of that nature. Does that play a factor into it? They said no. You have to believe it has to take some sort of weight, but also you do see teams all across the league making some of these decisions. They don't want to maybe pay 2 GMs and 2 coaches this year if they do have to do a whole staff overhaul. And then, of course, you have all the assistants that, depending on their contracts, it could be a real expensive move at that. But I thought that was all very interesting. And then speaking of things that piqued my ears today, Nick, it seems like 2021 – they're lining up to try to swing for another home run at quarterback. I mean, that was mentioned both from Ted Phillips and George McCaskey. And as we kind of transition here to Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy, it seems like everything's on the table in terms of how you can acquire a quarterback, whether it be another trade, free agency, the draft. To me, it really sounded like the draft just by how many times they referenced it. Ryan Pace has good drafts lately. He can learn from his mistake. He won't mention what he can learn, but apparently there are lessons to learn. And I know that ownership says that they do believe that Matt and Ryan can deliver on a quarterback in 2021 due to what? Collaboration and their partnership and being able to work through some of these personnel decisions together. Unlike when they swung for Trubisky, Ryan Pace didn't have that kind of working relationship with John Fox. And Nick, I'm curious to your points here when it comes to the quarterback and it comes to these two. Can you give me just one reason why you trust them to make this decision? I was going to be a nasty co-host and ask you to give me 3. But in my notes, like, let's have Nick try to pull 3 out. But can you at least give us 1?
Matt Nagy was on the coaching staff that drafted Patrick Mahomes. That's all I can literally give you, because there is no confidence in me, and I would think a lot of Bears fans, that Ryan Pace can get the quarterback position right. Just look at Trubisky, Glennon, Foles. That's all you need to know. All of those have been disasters in terms of what the quarterback position has provided for this team, or lack of, right? So that's the only thing. But it does seem like this time around, not like with John Fox, there is going to be that collaboration in choosing this quarterback. It was interesting, though, because I will say that for most of the press conference, it sounded like to me that Mitch Trubisky was out. Like, he's going to be the odd man out until I think it was Mark Potash again asked the question, but how Ryan Pace was framing and answering is like, don't close a chapter. Like, he stopped at chapter and that was it. Like, Dan Durkin tweeted, I might be wrong here, but it sounded like Pace was hinting in his answer to Potsy's question about Mitch that he was starting to say he's not so sure Mitch should be written off just yet. I need to read transcript, but Big X book. But I remember hearing it and thinking the exact same thing. Like, wait, this whole press conference seemed like, man, Mitch is like how they looking for more out of the quarterback position. But then that answer from Pace, like, it almost reeled it back in that it could be a possibility. What I don't know if you remember that part, Will, but what was just your interpretation of Mitch Trubisky and how they kind of view him?
Like you, it felt like they were throwing him under the bus without naming names for the vast majority of this press conference. Everyone mentioned we need more out of the quarterback decision. We're looking hard at the quarterback decision. We know that we need to get way more out of that position that we haven't gotten yet. And it really felt like they believe that they're just that one position away from everything else kind of coming together. And I understand that it's the most important position of football. I don't believe the Bears have gotten it right. So that's an obvious one to point to. But with that other comment too, I wonder if it was almost kind of like the Allen Robinson comments where they're kind of keeping it open, although I think we already know how this story's already been written, because they don't want to just say publicly we're moving on from Mitch until they have that conversation with him. And I believe that's why they preface some of those answers by saying, well, the coaching staff is still in the midst of their postseason evaluations of all of our players.
That's very true. And then how they kind of responded to Foles, they mentioned, well, the line wasn't in place. The running game wasn't as good. And then he got
They made some
injured.
excuses for him real quick.
Yeah, so how I viewed that until that one answer from Pace, like, Mitch is out. He's the fall guy, like Pagano was, kind of how you can view this thing. And then Foles, and look, this is me interpreting it, maybe not the guy, but who will be back out of the two.
Yep, that's pretty much where I felt. So then you're looking at who plus Foles, and what does that look like? If you're looking at a rookie in Foles, that's a whole different conversation depending on when that person gets drafted. If you're making another trade for some of these bigger names that are looking to go elsewhere, that creates a whole new dynamic that we will need to figure out. So it's interesting, but Pace did mention that this whole offseason is about the quarterback. So we had a whole offseason about the kicker. We had a whole offseason about tight end, and now we have a whole offseason about quarterback for a guy that when he was hired said every offseason is going to be about finding a quarterback. So we're finally here. This is the lesson. It took 6 years to get to priority number one. I'm curious here, Nick, because he also mentioned, Ryan Pace, that management has given them, and I'm assuming that means Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace, all of the resources that they can ask for when it comes to getting the quarterback that they believe is the best for this franchise. Do you get worried about the implications of that? Because I'm looking at, the cap space, which we already know is a disaster, draft picks, mortgaging the Bears' future again, all for a quarterback. And if this is Ryan Pace's last year and he puts all of those resources on the table, spends them all, throws them all away, and he misses on his quarterback position again, boy, is that going to set us back maybe a decade.
Yeah, absolutely will. So when I heard all the resources, like, all right, does that mean the Bears are going to push all their chips and all their draft stock into getting Deshaun Watson? That could salvage everything. But a likely scenario, probably not. And them trying to do whatever it is possible to get a quarterback. Ryan Pace has shown that he is not afraid to expend resources from years down the road. That's why, this is the first time the Bears have a first-round draft pick since 2018. You look at Khalil Mack and things like that. They're trading picks all the damn time. But, yeah, that is you give the green light to Ryan Pace. I feel like a stupid decision's coming. Like, from just the latest track record, I feel like we're on that course. I know they said he's still learning. Well, you got to stop. You need to know. It can't be you're still learning when you're making whatever this next big, decision may be if it happens. So that scares me, Will. You have all the resources. I don't know how I feel about that.
Do you feel like this is a higher risk reward scenario than if they would have cut ties with Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy? Because I feel like it has to be. Because if you bring in, or if you keep Ryan Pace here, and he does mortgage the future for a QB and he misses, whoever the next GM is has a huge hole. And we're already looking at a decent sized one to kind of dig ourselves out of already when it comes to cap space. And we just now got some draft capital back after barely having any after the Khalil Mack trade. And I feel like if he misses again, whoever needs to be his predecessor, he's going to have a huge tough time compared to already the difficult task that if we would have moved on this year, we would have faced. But if we're looking at 2022 or beyond, and Ryan Pace totally screws the pooch here again, I feel like that puts this franchise in a much more damning situation than it already is. And I feel like I'm having a hard time weighing the risk reward of the current trajectory of this franchise.
Yeah, and that's why I didn't agree with Ryan Pace being back. Now that he has the green light and you already felt like he should have been gone before this point, come on. Like you're going to put all your eggs in one basket in a guy that really, is hit on some draft picks. I'll give him that. Obviously, there are some good players that Ryan Pace has drafted, but the position he's got completely wrong. And George was asked about that. I think just like, okay, with Nick Foles, Trubisky, and Glennon, like what gives you confidence? Again, circling around, giving an accurate answer, but that's what is so, I think, frightening. That whatever can happen in the next couple months could be detrimental to the Bears' future for years down the road.
And it's interesting, too, because in order for Nagy and Pace to stay, you feel like, and again, it's been apparently a few days of Hollis Hall where things have been kind of, I guess I'll use the word heated, but I think probably just real, like, deep reflection internally. And you have to believe that they gave them a story or they gave them a plan that eased their tension enough to keep them here. Because if they didn't, I would say this decision gets even more damning real quickly. But when Pace was asked about it today, and again, he doesn't need to tip his hand, show us his cards right now fully, but any sort of plan would have been nice to hear. And when asked about, how do you go from the current culture of the 8-8 teams to a winning one, he said they need to identify what the problems are and go fix it. So that tells me they do not know what the problems are now, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So you don't know what your problems are. But like, I think one of the common, like, oh, well, it's been 3 days since the season's ended. We're still going in the evaluating phase. Like, no, like if we can see the problems, you should know it. But I feel like they don't.
Anything that you want to mention about, I know Pace talked about cap issues and needs to be conscious of it. There's always ways to make space, which again gets me real wary because either you're going to be losing some talented players or he's going to be restructuring contracts that are already kind of bubbling up and he keeps pushing this money back. It's kind of like moving debt from one credit card to another. Eventually the payment's going to be due. But anything else about Ryan Pace, Matt Nagy? I know Pace also mentioned learning through experiences. He's getting better with this every single year. And not a lot of teams have, again, the relationships within the building to make decisions together. And I think what we need to understand, or what they should understand, is even though you like everyone that you're working with and you can make a decision that you all agree with, it doesn't make any one of you right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the only other thing, Will, is that it was mentioned in this press conference that Khalil Mack was dealing with a shoulder injury, I believe, right? That's what.
Yeah, that was real.
Yeah. So yeah, that's how they framed it. That was real. So, and they didn't say whether or not he needs surgery but it was, in fact, like Will just stated, it was real. But that was the only other thing that I wanted to bring up.
I wish someone would have asked about Jalen Johnson's shoulder and if that was going to need a surgery, because he's mentioned no serious or no major surgeries are going to be planned, at least in their knowledge as of right now. I know they're still going through physicals, but I don't know. No major surgery. Feels like some people will be having surgery. And if Jalen Johnson, who already has a huge list of surgeries he's had on both of his shoulders, has another one, it just starts to be almost become worst case scenario? Like, we knew when we drafted him in May, like, there's a little bit of risk here. Real talented player, but those shoulders are concerning. And he missed the last few games of the season, was unable to go for the playoffs. And he does, even if he needs a, quote, minor surgery on his shoulder, I think that would be concerning to Bears fans. But outside of that, Nick, I do have just a few questions as we kind of wrap up the press conference portion of this week's show. Confidence level in Matt Nagy, Ryan Pace getting the QB right in 2021.
I mean, well, it's got to be for me like a 3, 2, like in that range. We haven't seen it, and the closest person that has had any success was Matt Nagy when he was an offensive coordinator with the Chiefs. I don't know how much input he had, but he was on the staff, so I don't know if you give him a little bit of, hey, he was on the staff that picked Patrick Mahomes. That counts for something, but there really isn't any confidence. We've seen the guys that they've selected and their willingness not to select guys when, Ryan Pace said when he got here, every single year you draft a quarterback. Now you have to, or now you have to select a quarterback. All the pressure's on. Do you think Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy can get that right when they have to get somebody? And if they don't, they're most likely out.
Yeah, that's a lot of pressure for one decision, more so than it already is. With you, Nick, I'm at about a 2 or a 3. I don't know why you can be above a 5 in this regard, unless you're just doing the whole losing streak mantra that I was doing, right? Like, it's real hard to miss on 4 quarterbacks, or it's real hard to miss on 5. Like, eventually you have to hit on one, right? No, we've seen this. We've been Chicago Bears fans long enough. You can continually miss at this position. I'm curious, though, now you already kind of mentioned this one a little bit more informally, but this whole last few days, it's like, well, maybe Ryan Pace is gone, but Nagy stays. Or maybe Nagy's gone, but Ryan Pace stays. Or maybe Ryan Pace gets a promotion and then Nagy's gone. But it really seemed like today, and you said it, they are now tied together. I believe how it was framed today, they are married. Once one goes, the other's going to go, at least as it stands today. Unless for some reason the whole team implodes, we lose a lot of games, but they believe in the talent that Ryan Pace acquired this offseason, and they believe it was a coaching fault. That's the only way I see that working out. But as it was framed, it's Matt and Ryan work well together. Matt and Ryan. So I think right now the success or the failure will determine their fates here in Chicago collectively.
Absolutely. So going back to the point, like, what's Ryan Pace's contract? He did mention, which maybe were some hints, like, obviously he from here, went to Eastern Illinois. He's got family here. He kept mentioning that. And, like, the roots are here. And when he was talking about giving that answer, it's like, like, obviously the Bears website says the contract's through 2021. But he's like, I know how Bears fans think. My family's here. Is he here for longer? So I don't, again, maybe looking too into it, but I do agree. Like I said earlier, when or not an if, more like a when Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy go, they'll both go at the same time. It's not you're keeping one and then bringing in the next regime, the next general manager, and then he has to deal with Matt Nagy. When one goes, the other one's going, and that settles it.
All right, tough questions. We're going to keep rolling. It's a great theme today. Everyone's been asking tough ones. Nick, when we look back at this decision, because it's one that's either going to make or break this franchise for a decent amount of time, are we going to see this as one that sets the Bears back, which is everyone's fear?
It's hard not to think that way, Will, because they have to get the most important position right with quarterback. They have to find pass rush. They need to draft possibly a wide receiver when Allen Robinson maybe goes, if they don't franchise tag him. There's a lot of holes left for what – look, this 2020 season was supposed to be a must win, go to the playoffs, and a deep run to the playoffs. Didn't happen. Now this is it. This is definitely it in terms of what the Bears have to do and be a successful team and have a successful season. So there's just so many things that are preventing them from actually accomplishing that. So, yeah, I'm just not confident that they can't do that. But I think it will be a move that will ultimately set this franchise back.
Okay. On top of that now, I'm going through my notes. That was a really good response that you had there, Nick, on it. I'm with you. It's hard to expect anything other than that right now. Obviously, it can go in any other direction. they could get better. They could make this decision right, and we could find ourselves in favorable positions moving forward. There's just a lot of ifs in between here and there, and my confidence isn't surely there to expect them to really get all those answers right, in particular the most important one. As a fan, how do you feel about the Bears wanting to remain steady here for another year and roll it back? Because it feels like this is another offseason of going all in 2021 after we already went all in 2018, all in 2019, all in 2020, and it's just starting to feel really mute, at least to me at this point.
Well, I think it feels that way is because the results aren't there. Like you're going all in and you win 8-8, you win all in again and you're 8-8 again. Like that's what, like as a fan, and when you look forward towards the 2021 season, look, no doubt, like once that starts to approach and we get closer, we're going to get excited, but I don't know if expectations should be anything higher than 8-8. You're bringing the exact same people that have led you down that road the past 2 seasons. Why should you expect anything better?
Okay, I have another tough one for you. What's most likely? The Bears pull off another big trade for a quarterback to hopefully get it right, or a trade up in the first round to get one of the top, say, 3 or 4 QBs?
They would need a quarterback that can win now, and it is a pretty good draft class in the top half. And we know Pace, he's had a history of doing it, and he's got a first-round draft pick this year, and he knows he'll have years down the road. I'm going to say trading up in the draft, day one, in that top 5 range. That I think is more likely than trading for one of the quarterbacks that's out there right now. But again, both are very unlikely, but I'll go with that one. What are you thinking?
I feel like it has to be, right? It's to trade. Well, either way, you're going to give up a ton of capital. So I don't know. I really think it's going to go either way. If he goes for one of the quarterbacks out there now, which I don't know why we're dancing around it. You're looking at a Deshaun Watson if you're going to make a big old move like that, which could be very unlikely. But that would really make up for some of the sins in the past, as the phrase goes. Although then you're really, again, you're mortgaging your future, and how the Bears front office is kind of coming across. And Watson's already having issues with the front office down in Houston. Who knows if this would be a destination that he would even kind of push for. So perhaps for that reason, the draft makes more sense to me. And even if you don't go top 5, you can probably still get one in the top 10, depending on how needs go and how the draft falls.
That could definitely be a possible scenario. I'm like looking up free agent quarterbacks. Obviously, number 1's Dak Prescott. I'm not advocating for this, but do you think the name Carson Wentz enters the rooms of Hallis Hall, knowing that he's in a similar system? Maybe had a bad year where Doug Peterson was fired, and I don't know if anyone in the chat wants to weigh in what you think. Like a Carson Wentz, like if you need somebody that obviously is experienced, had a terrible season, is that an option? Are you going to take that contract too? Like that's also mortgaging the future as well. But just pointing out scenarios, like everything's on the table. And I love the gift that you used earlier, Will. With
I made that.
You had. Oh, you made that. That's fantastic. I loved it. But maybe I have no idea though.
Wow, wouldn't that be a? Gosh, it feels like you just get everyone's hand-me-downs, though, consistently when you have something like that, like Wentz and Foles in the same QB room. Woohoo, where'd you learn that one from?
Bring in Doug Peterson as your offensive coordinator. You have the Eagles as the Bears.
I don't think Wentz would want to work with Peterson again.
That's true. They hate each other, so scratch that.
Right. But, hey, just bring the band. Every failed branch of the Andy Reid tree, come on in. If we have enough wood glue, we can reinstill it, and it'll all work. I promise. Nick, did we learn anything today?
Nope. We didn't learn
I think we learned some stuff. I think we did. I learned that they don't know the root of their problem. From the top down, they don't know what their problem is. That's something that we learned. I think we kind of already knew it. They didn't admit it, but it definitely was on full display today. So I'm going to take it as a learning, unfortunately.
I guess, yeah, that's a good point there, Will. I guess we also learned that this organization and George McCaskey, Ted Phillips have faith in the body of work that doesn't warrant to have confidence. Normal people wouldn't have confidence in, but they do. So we learned that they're insane, delusional, not the smartest cream of the crop there. Like that's
all
what
the
I
above.
kind of learned. All the above. Yep.
Next time I see McCaskey in person, I won't have that big smile on my face. I won't take my selfie with him. And I won't be like, I think the last time we saw him was right after the 2018 season. Yeah, because we saw him before they made us rebrand. Saw him again. It was like after that 12-4 year, and like, wow, things were going really well. Good job. Boy, do I wish I would take that back.
Yeah, the last time I saw him was at Bears Fit. He was doing some weird exercises, probably thinking like, why did I get Ryan Pace and doing all this crap? But yeah, it's been some time.
If you become his personal trainer and he doesn't remember who you are, you can get some good nuggets and just kind of spew them on the podcast. Like, I have a source.
I'm wearing a mask. Like
Hey.
I'll wear a hat too. You won't even know who I am.
And act like you don't know who he is, and he'll just complain about the Bears all aside like, and yeah, that will be in. That's that's our new path. But yeah, no, I think we learned they don't know what their problem is. I believe we learned it is a do or die season for Pace and Nagy. They're gonna have to go all in to find a way to win now with a new quarterback, which to me, you need to either get one of the top guys in the draft or you're going to have to find a top guy out there currently in the NFL. Neither is going to come cheap, and there's going to be some huge trade-offs of any path that the Bears take here. But yeah, and other than that, they're working together, and apparently they have a really good time doing it, and they're looking forward to another offseason together to try to make decisions collaboratively, and hopefully this time they're the right ones.
Yeah, that's easier said than done there, Will.
All right. So on top of all this, we also found out that over the last day that the Chicago Bears now former defensive coordinator Chuck Pagano has officially retired. Let's be real. Either he was going to get fired or the Bears were going to allow him to retire. And I think he kind of took the graceful path out of Hallis Hall. And this was just a nice gesture for everyone to save face. But alas, regardless, the end result is the same. Chuck Pagano is gone, and the Bears are now in search of a new defensive coordinator. Nick, I just want to know, how are you feeling about Pagano leaving? It feels like it was necessary, but yet I think fans would understand not enough.
Yeah, it's obviously the defense has regressed since Chuck Pagano has taken over, but look, they were the only reason that the Bears were even in this game against the Saints. Like, to be completely honest, how that unit played, just missing Roquan Smith. But I think it was a foregone conclusion. I know I've mentioned that on previous podcasts before the season was over that Pagano would be out, and just seemed like the fall guy again, similar to how Harry Heastand and Kevin Gilbride and Mark Helfrich were the fall guys going into the 2019 season or after the 2019 season. So it just seemed like that was going to be that's how I looked at it once Pagano was retired.
Yes, retiring. I was like, yes, that's what you said it right. I'm making sure here. Yeah, it's interesting because usually when people leave, we like to commemorate them. Which again, Chuck Pagano, great guy, great person. But Nick, this is the problem. Great guy, great person doesn't necessarily make him a great defensive coordinator. At least for this Chicago Bears team, at least for the NFL right now, we weren't getting the results. And even though we like Chuck off the field, we need to find something more. And I wish that same mindset would have been applied to some other areas within this organization. But usually, Nick, we take a moment, we reflect on the best moments and everything like that. We did a whole tribute to Vic Fangio, but that was warranted. With Chuck Pagano as the Bears defensive coordinator, I can't really grasp at like strong positives. It's like, he really took care of Tom Brady this season, against the Buccaneers. That was a positive. But when it comes to the Bears defense as a whole, we can honestly admit, Nick, since he took over, all we have seen is steady regression.
Yeah, steady regression, and we've seen spurts where we've mentioned like, oh, that looked like Vic Fangio's unit, but it was just so inconsistent to where we knew that that wasn't going to be the case with this defense under Chuck Pagano. But yeah, I think that is definitely one of the highlight moments, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers game. You can look at last year's game against the Minnesota Vikings right before they played the Raiders in London. They shut down the NFL's leading rusher in Dalvin Cook that day. But it was too limited, too many. Like, you can count one hand, and if you're missing a couple fingers, you can get the same amount of times that Chuck Pagano had some good games there, and which is the problem. And look, I think now it's a good time for him probably to again, retire. He can spend time with his family, and that's what he's kind of alluded to. And he's been through a lot, going through cancer, beating cancer, and, being a football coach. That's awesome for him. So, wish him the best of luck. But like you said, it was time for the Bears to move on. And, it's not going to be easy to just find somebody that's going to be a top 10 defense. Like, that's what Chuck Pagano's units were. They were a little, top 10 is being nice, but it's going to be tough to find someone that could do that or even better.
I would argue with that a little bit. I think he took something that was really strong. Again, remember last season we returned 20 of 22 starters. Most of the defense came back besides Bryce Callahan and a safety. So there were things that we were working toward that seemed like we were going to be able to keep status quo, and he couldn't even keep it at that. So for me, I think you could find someone that can maybe reinstill some tenacity in this defense, because that was gone. And on top of that, some of that, this energy and passion that you see some of the other defenses in the league play with, as well as some fun. I mean, go back to the 2018 team. Watch them play defense. Look at the aggressiveness. Look at how much fun they're having bullying quarterbacks and getting after them, the defensive line, the secondary being aggressive and coming away with those big takeaways. That's been missing. And I don't know if it was just because Chuck was a little softer than Vic, which I think we can agree he probably was. Not the same kind of rah-rah. Not that Vic was a rah-rah coach, but he's like the dad that you better not disappoint. Like, if you disappoint Vic Fangio and you go in the doghouse, you're in trouble. I don't think we had that same kind of accountability with Chuck Pagano, which led to some complacency around here on this defense. And that's, to me, something that I want to find a way to get back to. This is what we kind of had more with Vic, but not doing the same thing Vic did, because that's not going to work. You can't bring someone in here and say, run Vic's system and get back to that defense. You need to bring someone in here that wants to put their own wrinkle on it. But whatever that wrinkle needs to it needs to be one, like I said, that brings back some of that nasty to this defense. And I know that Jay Rodgers is an interesting in-house candidate. Brad Biggs also mentioned safeties coach Sean Desai, who Fangio did want to bring to Denver, but the Bears blocked that a couple seasons ago. Would be another in-house candidate that's exciting. And I know with like Jay Rodgers, he's always up front. He's a defensive line coach for people who don't know. He's always brought guys who are not really with high expectations and getting the most out of them. Look at Nick Williams a year ago. Then even this season, John Jenkins and a Brent Urban. So he's always doing getting the most out of his players, but that doesn't mean that he's already going to be ready to make play calls, run the whole defense. And what I fear about going with either in-house candidate, Nick, would be some of that complacency still in place, and he wouldn't really reinvigorate this defense that we can probably get if we do look outside. What are your thoughts about some in-house candidates and the pros and the cons?
Yeah, no, looking at Jay Rodgers, like, he already knows all the defensive guys, right? I know he specifically works with a defensive lineman, but he doesn't have to really establish himself there because he's already been here. Like, the defensive guys know him. So that's, I guess, my concern. And, obviously being the first time at calling plays with a must-win season, are the Bears going to want somebody that has a little bit more experience doing so? So that's something to be to keep into consideration when you're thinking about defensive coordinator, who could possibly fill that. But Kevin Fishbane from The Athletic wrote a really good article about some candidates. And Aaron Glean from the Saints, he's their secondary coach, was one of the guys that he put on there. And look, the Bears have lacked turnovers since Chuck Pagano's got here. And the Saints this year were tied for first in the league with interceptions under the guidance of Aaron Glean, the secondary coach there. So that could be a possibility. Another guy that I thought was kind of intriguing, Joe Barry, the Rams assistant head coach, that's linebackers coach. Look how that Rams defense has been playing, and Leonard Floyd is on there tearing it up right now. So he can get the most out of players that obviously the Bears couldn't. So that is somebody that was also just a name. And look, I haven't done like the most in-depth research of seeing like how these guys can fit, what exact systems could be run in Chicago. But those are names I initially saw like, okay, I'll jot that down. Let's do some homework, see what these guys are really about, and we'll come to that conclusion in a little bit.
Yeah, for Aaron from the Saints, I know he was a 15-year NFL vet, a lot of experience playing as well. The DB's coached in New Orleans since 2016, and he's been churning out a plethora of great DBs down there in New Orleans. Big reason why Marshawn Lattimore has been able to kind of turn around his career like he has as well. You talked about the takeaways, and on top of that, too, that defense, he really helped that pass defense, ranked, I think, 5th in NFL yards allowed per game this season, 6th in yards allowed, as well as per pass play, and 4th at the interception rate, so interceptions per pass. Luckily, I had those from last week. Unfortunately, I had to repurpose them here this week, but that's okay. And then another one that you didn't mention would be Gerald Alexander, who's the DB's coach from Miami and the Dolphins down there, another former NFL DB. This is, though, his only season as a position coach in the NFL. But when you watch that Dolphins secondary play with the energy and the passion, it excites me. And he's helped create a top 5 defense down there in Miami that's top 5 in points allowed at 18.4 points per game, the NFL's top 3rd down defense, and also the best takeaway unit with 29 combined interceptions and fumbles recovered. So I think we're along the same lines. We want to find someone that can bring some aggressiveness back, find that magic formula to get the turnovers back. And I think the other thing that we need to consider here too when we're looking at this in the future, and maybe they make a decision here soon, all this to kind of go away here quickly, but whoever comes in, they need to get the most out of what the Bears are investing in the most on defense. I'm looking at Khalil Mack, Robert Quinn, Eddie Jackson. They need to find a way to untap them because the last 2 seasons, I'm tired, Nick, and I've been thinking hard about this. I'm tired of teams being able to take away Khalil Mack. And I know we can have the double, triple team conversation, but when you look around the NFL, there are plenty of edge defenders who are getting double teamed or getting triple teams, but defenses find a way to get them involved. And I don't think that should be an excuse for us anymore. Mack gets paid way too much to be consistently phased out. If the NFL found a solution for Khalil Mack, we are screwed. So the Bears need to find a way to counter what the NFL has done for Khalil. And I know there's holdings and things like that, but we're not going to get into those right now. On top of that, so getting the most out of the playmakers, getting more aggressive. Do you think you're going to best suited finding that in-house or out-of-house? I think out-of-house, to me, makes a lot of sense. Of course, that does create potentially more turnover when it comes to some positional coaches, which is another, I guess, trade-off here. And even when it comes to scheme, I've been thinking about this off and on for the last 2 nights now. I don't think it matters if it's 3-4, 4-3 anymore. You see teams run multiple fronts. The Bears do it all the time right now. So I don't think you need to, if fans are listening and they're wanting to do their own research, I don't think you only need to look at 4-3 coaches or only 3-4 coaches. I think you can look at anyone who is from any system in the NFL, and you can apply it over as long as you like the defense and what they're doing.
That's a good point, Will. And I got to imagine that there's some coaches out there, maybe guys that we mentioned or other assistants that are like, man, if I just had a Khalil Mack, I would know what to do with him. But go ahead, Will.
Well, one more question. Would you like someone who's an up-and-coming positional guy, so you're younger, which I think would really vibe well with what Nagy's trying to do here? Because, again, you keep bringing in these old defensive coaches, which Vic Fangio, I think he's his own breed, so that's okay. But I think when you go, like, I know people are talking about, like, Wade Phillips and things like that. I don't know. I'm kind of tired of the old head coaches that failed and bringing them back to being my defensive coordinator. And I think that's almost like a handcuff for Nagy still to be like, well, I'm learning more about head coaching from this guy. And I want this to be Nagy's ship. If they're going to put all the success and failure at his feet, why not bring in another young, big energy type of guy for defense? And maybe it's time for you, Matt, to teach him how to be a better coach at a higher degree than where you're at right now. So, and there could be good candidates out there with head coaching experience, and I'm not going to completely block it out. But I think I would lean towards someone that I would trust can take that step forward, even if they don't have the resume that shows that they can call plays or anything like that, as long as I know they can instill a culture on defense that's been lacking.
I mean, that's a good point, Will. And I don't know if we're going to start seeing a trend where defensive coordinators are now starting to become head coaches, like to kind of go a little bit off topic. Like Robert Saleh is a very highly coveted guy right now and he's a defensive guy. Like that's not usually the trend that people find in head coaches, but it would be, I guess, a breath of fresh air to find someone that's younger who does bring that energy. But the thing is, like, they need to win now. So can you really invest in somebody that can maybe take some time, who's going to be learning 6 years in, like Ryan Pace is? No, I'm just kidding. To finally get this right. But all things that the Bears need to consider, and they can't mess up. You mess up at any one of these big positions, whether it's coaching or actual like players positions, they're those higher ups, Matt Nagy, Ryan Pace, will be out. So it's going to be an intense, hopefully it becomes intense, because it was way too laid back in the press conferences today, but it needs to be an intense, vigorous process that they need to start right now.
Yep, absolutely. Do you think, I know there are some rumblings out there that maybe this is not even an enticing position in the NFL due to this lame duck environment that the Bears are setting up? I think it depends. Honestly, of course, the individual and what they're wanting their career to look like, but I have a hard time believing if we're looking at some of these positional coaches, if they get an offer for a defensive coordinator gig, unless they really like where they're at, I have to see a hard time them actually turning it down. And then secondly, you have a defense as it sits today with a Khalil Mack and a Akeem Hicks, an Eddie Jackson, a Kyle Fuller, a Jalen Johnson, a Roquan Smith. You have names. And if you believe you can get the most out of them, I think it's still a very enticing job for some of the players that you would have to coach.
Yeah, I would think that if someone was given the opportunity, they're gonna take it and no questions asked. Like all those players you mentioned, like if a defensive coordinator can't get the most out of those guys, then what do you think the other defenses in the league look like? I mean, it's not that well-rounded, and that's why we expected more from this defense and why ultimately Chuck Pagano is no longer here. He just couldn't get the most out of all those big names that you just mentioned, which is, I think, plenty enough for a defensive coordinator to get the most out of. Yes, the players need to play better, but yeah, any potential candidate is going to look at this job. I still think, despite 8-8 seasons and, I guess if you want to look at positively, playoffs in 2 of the 3 seasons. I know people won't look at it that way, but I still think it's a very enticing job.
Okay. Anything else on the opening vacancy that the Bears have? The lone vacancy as it stands, at least at this recording? Things are always destined to change.
I plead the fifth.
Oh, you're allowed to do that.
That was who said that? It was Allen Robinson said that about the franchise tag, and then it was Cameron Jordan when they asked about. I don't know if you saw this clip. Will,
I saw that.
Preparing for Mitch Trubisky. Like, where's that ring?
Is he a threat?
Can I plead the fifth? So that's where I'm going.
Do you feel any better about the press conference now that we're a few hours after it and we've already discussed it? Did you find any additional substance with our conversation, putting things into not a different perspective, but at least vocalizing it? I don't think I feel any better, but it did feel good at least get on the same page as to what they were putting out there so we can be aligned as, again, Nick, I like working with you. The good thing is I think we do a good job together. So that's a hand-in-hand. That's a win-win situation. But now the Bears need to find out if the guys that they like working with and working together, collaborating with, dang it, I heard the word so many times today, you think I wouldn't stumble over it. But I think now we got to find out if they can not just work well together, but work well towards finding the correct solutions for this franchise. And that's where my confidence takes a nosedive.
Yeah, absolutely. They got to collaborate like we do, Will, and then they'll be in a good spot. But actually, so I re-listened to a good portion of it before today's podcast, and the things that I wrote down, I'm like, are you kidding me? So it was good talking about it, and then, like you said, being on the same page. But nothing made me feel better than my initial reaction when I heard it earlier today. So that's where I'm at, but at least we're on the same page. We know exactly what they said and what they really didn't say. And now they just got to collaborate some more to get on hopefully the right track.
Do you still believe Allen Robinson's gone based off of what we heard today too?
I think that, like, he's not a fan of the franchise tag, and I get that, and he can pull a Le'Veon Bell and, obviously not play a year, but I think that's where it's heading. And the comment about him, like, we had 365 days to kind of solve this, that really, I was like, all right, see you later, A-Rob. It was really nice while we had it here, but I think it will end up being some kind of tag, franchise tag most likely, but I'm not confident in saying that. I think Allen Robinson will be gone.
That's tough, right? Because if you tag him, you're paying him a lot of money, and you still don't have any security for the future. And on top of that, Nick, if you lose Allen Robinson, this is another question I had in my notes and I forgot about. If you lose A-Rob, how much harder does that make actually getting that quarterback position right? Because you are already doing whoever that person is a huge disservice by letting the best wide receiver Chicago's had in a very long time simply walk away. And then the Bears are, hey, maybe, and this is another interesting thing I've been thinking through, even if they got the right guy, then who's he throwing to? And then how can you properly assess him if he doesn't have a wide receiver one, like Allen Robinson? I think that puts this whole organization in a tougher bind for the quarterback position. And obviously, if you have the right QB, you can have less talented playmakers and it can still help them achieve higher accomplishments. But I feel like if you're Matt Nagy and also Ryan Pace, and you know that your success or your contract situation, that's how I'll phrase it, here in Chicago hinges on your ability to unlock the quarterback in 2021, and you let your best wide receiver walk, it's like having a cheat code and not using it, and then you have to find a way to do it the hard way.
Yeah, so it's not, and then you just look at the other guys. Like, is Anthony Miller going to be back? And like, it's going to be a huge hole, especially if Robinson's gone. But I know a couple people in the chat mentioned sign and trade. That's also an option, and maybe could be the most likely one, honestly, for what can happen with Allen Robinson. But yeah, whichever quarterback does come here, and they don't see that they have Allen Robinson, which was almost all the Bears' offense combined with David Montgomery, and you have Matt Nagy and Bill Lazor still collaborating with play calling, good luck. So everything's against the Bears. Now that we keep on talking about it, it seems like everything's against them, and that's just not a way that you want. That's not what you want to have going into another must-win season.
Everything's connected. There's going to be a trickle-down effect from the Allen Robinson decision. And as we already know, the decision to keep Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace, which, Nick, as much as we are confused by it, I think we're more confused about why or how they framed it. Like, if they would have said, you know what, here are the 5 reasons why Matt and Ryan deserve to be here, maybe I'd have a different tone today. But they just felt like the only thing they can tell us is that they work well together and they think they're good people. And that's not enough. That's not going to win you ball games here in the NFL. That's not going to put fans in the stands when we can allow fans back in them. And that's what concerns me, is that they couldn't even give us concrete examples of why they're here. And then the guys who were staying here, Pace and Nagy, could not give us concrete examples or plans as to how they're going to do better, other than we need to identify the problem and then fix it, which is the most generic BS we could have ever asked for, which isn't a surprise. You just wish we could have had some sort of authenticity come through today from anyone who talked. We didn't get it. And again, no surprise, just still super unfortunate.
Yeah, and like, we didn't even mention a lot what Matt Nagy said because he didn't say anything.
Right.
So that was a whole press conference that he was there for, and there wasn't any real substance that you can actually take from Matt Nagy's press conference, other than what we need more out of the quarterback position, which was said by the last 3 people. So, yeah, I agree with you. It was, probably a waste of time when you look at it, like, collectively. I know we got some things that we can take out of it, but we didn't get much, and the Bears don't seem like they have answers to their biggest problems, which obviously is a problem.
Well, they spoke for about 90 minutes combined. Right now we're at about 72 minutes, 72 and a half. I feel like we've given a lot more substance. I think we're able to put things in a much deeper context that we heard earlier today. So I think we did a pretty good job, and I think it's time to call it an episode. What do you think?
I think that's a good way to end it, Will.
All right, well, that'll do it. Make sure to rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts if you haven't already. We really want to give away that next free Bears jersey to one lucky reviewer. And, of course, that happens once we reach number 700. And, Nick, before we officially sign off, do you want to let people know how they can get a shout-out on our next show?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and look, it's the off season, but we're still giving out shout outs to all the shows that we'll be doing throughout the off season. So you can get a shout out if you send us a donation through Venmo or PayPal. And on Venmo, the handle is at the Chicago Audible. Should see my name and the Chicago Audible logo. Now on PayPal, it's www.chicagoaudible.com/PayPal. Again, any donation will help us just to help run this show like we're doing right now. And you get a shout out on the next podcast. Again, Venmo is at the Chicago Audible. PayPal is www.chicagoaudible.com/PayPal, and we'll give you a shout out in the next podcast. So feel free to do that whenever you have some free time.
And if you want to come up with something hilarious about Pace and Nagy for us to read on the next one, I would love to see what you have in store so we can put out those shout outs properly. All right, but if no major news breaks, our next show, Nick, I believe is going to be our annual award show, which I almost feel, and this is me just off the cuff here, almost feel like out of every single year, how things are going right now, it just feels like the most awkward next possible episode that we can have. But I'm here to embrace the awkwardness, I guess.
Yeah, we'll make fun with the entire episode, and it's going to be weird, but we'll make the best out of it.
And then we can move on to the state of the franchise and really kind of dig in, rip the team apart, and find a way to stitch it back together. As you and I, we need to start working out some official plans, outlaying them on the podcast on how we can help put the Bears in a stronger position here in 2021, which is going to give people a lot more substance than they had today. That's what all Bears fans were hoping to hear, and I'm excited to continue our off-season episodes. But again, our next one will be, unless anything major breaks beforehand, the awards show, and then we'll jump into our annual State of the Franchise episodes. But until next time, bear down, Chicago.